So we just got done with turn number 2. And again, not a lot of action to report on. Things are pretty quiet around the globe. Conflict really only in 2 spots, and that's in Spain and China for the civil wars that are going on in those 2 countries. So most nations just kind of building up their forces. A lot of nations saving their money, doing their tech rolls, and just kind of maneuvering their units around, putting them in position for the potential conflict down the road, the inevitable conflict. As far as the Germans, following suit and following the script of what they want to accomplish, which is taking out France and Poland on the same turn when they use their lightning war maneuver. So to that end, they're continuing to build units and send them to the border with France as well as Poland. They did buy a second air transport and a second Fallschirmjäger. So they now have 2 paratroopers they can drop somewhere once conflict does break out. They also annexed their second territory, Slovakia. So now they have 1 annexation left that they're allowed prior to the outbreak of war, and that's in Bohemia. So they'll be doing that on turn 3 here coming up. Other than that, not a lot from the Germans. They did send another unit to Franco's forces in Spain, an artillery unit. And we'll talk about here in a minute how the Spanish Civil War is playing out. That was really about it for Germany. The Russians here on the European side of the map, they also continue to place units in position to hopefully accomplish their militaristic goals, which in this case is getting units down here in the Mideast, bordering with Iran. So not only do they have units that are going to go into Iran at some point, but if you remember from the last game, the Russians left Transcaucasia wide open. The Germans were able to drop a paratrooper down there, and that aligned Turkey with Germany. So Russia's going to look to avoid that this turn, so they're going to permanently station some units in the Transcaucasus. That's why we have all these Russian units making their way down. Also, in the Far East, the Russians, again, they upgraded a militia over here, and they also just continue to move units bordering with these Mongolian territories that have an IPP value to be able to take them when Russia decides to go into Mongolia. And then they also have up here, bordering with Finland, they already have here in Karelia a pretty sizable force, 4 infantry, a cavalry, 2 fighters, and a tactical. So looking at conflict between Russia and Finland before too long. And then Stalin has authorized the organization of a mechanized corps, which is based here in Urel-Kursk. So that's 3 motorized infantry and 2 light armor. And that's just stationed back away from a potential future front with Germany to be able to counterattack once the Germans, or if the Germans break in. That was about it for Russia. As far as the Allies go, or the future Allies, the British, they continue to maneuver their naval assets around the board. So over here off of Alexandria, you've got 1 fleet, a light carrier, a battleship, a light cruiser, 2 heavy cruisers, 3 destroyers, a sub, and a torpedo boat destroyer. And then off of Gibraltar, we've got a battle cruiser, a battleship, 2 heavy cruisers, a light cruiser, and 2 destroyers. So UK just getting their as many naval assets in the Mediterranean as they can, obviously to offset the naval presence the Italians have in the Mediterranean. They also upgraded another militia here in North Africa, and they finished off a upgrade of a medium to a major factory in England itself. As far as the French go, they spent $7 of the $10 they had and they bought an artillery and an infantry they placed in Paris, and they moved an infantry and artillery up to the border with Germany. And they also are trying to get some naval units here organized in the Mediterranean. They also have 2 fleets, one based off of the southern coast of France there, and the other one here at the mouth of the Med. That's a couple battleships and a couple of destroyers. If this game follows how game 1 went, then the French really aren't going to be in a position to be able to use these naval assets. Germany was able to take Paris on the turn that they invaded France last game, and unless Germany runs into some really bad rolls, there's probably a good chance that'll happen again, which means before the French can even use any of these naval units, Paris will have been captured, and the Vichy rule will be in effect, and all these ships will have to be rolled for. So it's not necessarily that these French ships are going to be able to engage in combat with the Italians or the Germans or anybody else for that matter, but just pre-war, getting them in position so that it gives Italy something to think about. Italy kind of squeezed between several British and UK fleets. Now, if some of the ships end up going Allied once we do the Vichy rolls, then at least they'll be in a position down here to assist the British in the Mediterranean. So just kind of placing themselves in as best of a position as they can, the French Navy. The U.S. didn't do much. They saved their measly $6. Obviously, you're not going to really buy much with $6. So they saved that. They did their tech rolls, had a couple of stage 2 breakthroughs, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Other than that, the U.S. really didn't do anything. The Italians, they went ahead and bought their second naval transport. So they've got 2 small or medium-sized fleets here off the coast of Italy. You got 3 coastal subs, a regular sub, a torpedo boat destroyer, a heavy cruiser, and a destroyer here. And then in Sea Zone number 50, they got a battleship, 2 destroyers, a light cruiser, a sub, and 2 transports. So a couple of decent-sized fleets, definitely not enough to stand up to the UK and the French. But Italy doing what they can. That second naval transport now, since we're obviously pre-war, the Italians will be able to start using those 2 transports to get guys off of the Italian mainland down into North Africa. So they'll be taking advantage of those here within the next turn or two, just because once Italy is at war, assuming they eventually will be, those transports will probably be dispatched to the bottom of the Mediterranean fairly quickly by the UK. So they want to get as much use out of them as they can prior to conflict. So probably on this next turn here, they're going to start taking some of these guys that are in northern Italy, dropping them off in Africa, so that when conflict does come, at least Italy has a sizable army on the continent of Africa there. Other than that, their plane that had taken part in the conquest of Abyssinia flew back to Cyrenaica. That was about it for Italy. As far as the Spanish Civil War, if we look in Spain, there's not a lot of units left on the board for either side. So Franco's forces were here in Leon Castel, and that was their only territory, and they went into Madrid. Now, the good news is not only did they take Madrid, but there were sizable forces in there that they took out, and they were left with 3 artillery and a fighter. So that was the good news. The fighter obviously had to land back in Leon Castel, couldn't land in Madrid. That was a territory they just took. So then the Russian-backed forces on their turn went ahead and had just 2 territories, this northern and this southern Spanish territory that had units left in it. And altogether, there was 2 infantry and 2 artillery after Russia sent another artillery piece there. And those 2 artillery and man took out the Franco's lone fighter. And then on the recruitment roll, they got an infantry back. So now Franco's forces are holed up just in Madrid. The rest of the territories in Spain are enemy controlled. So even though it's 3 artillery pieces against 2 artillery pieces and 2 infantry, because there was no supply path to Franco's forces since they're surrounded in Madrid, Italy wasn't able to send over a unit. So not sure how that's going to play itself out. It might come down to whoever gets luckiest with their recruitment rolls, which at this point in the conflict, Franco forces have one territory, so he's going to have to hit on a roll of a 1. So you would figure right now it looks like the Russian-backed forces are going to get a victory, but we'll see if Germany can help tip the balance of power back into on Franco's side. In the Pacific, again, the only conflict taking place is here in China in the Civil War, and even this turn there was no combat whatsoever. The communists had failed on their warlord influence role, so they did not have enough forces to go into any of the remaining KMT territories. Conversely, the KMT wasn't strong enough really to eject the CCP. So they both sides just kind of maneuvered units around. It looks like the KMT, though, has 3 territories bordering Sichuan right now. So I think the CCP might have to pull back. If not, then we could see the KMT moving in with altogether probably about a dozen infantry into Sichuan. And if Sichuan was to fall, that's everything the CCP has but 1 territory and 1 infantry right now. So the CCP is probably going to have to hope they get some good roll here, both for recruitment and warlord on their portion of the turn 3 to gain some extra units and some more territory. If not, then it looks like the KMT might actually take China away from the CCP, which would be a change from game number 1. The CCP got some really good rolls in game number 1 and was able to influence warlords, almost every turn for the first few turns of the game. And that was just a snowball effect that overwhelmed the KMT. So we'll see how that plays itself out. As far as the Japanese, as you can see, they, much like the Germans, are going ahead and implementing their pre-war strategy. So they've got 2 fleets built up down here in the South Pacific, and both fleets have substantial ground units on transport. So over here, 2 transports got 2 infantry and 2 motorized, and then the fleet consists of a couple of subs, a battle cruiser, a battleship, 2 heavy cruisers, a light carrier, and a fleet carrier. And obviously those assets are more than enough to start taking some of these islands off of Anzac, the British, and the Netherlands once Japan goes to war. And then this fleet over here isn't as heavy in terms of capital ships right now, but it has 3 transports with 5 men, 5 infantry, and 1 cavalry. And then they do have some air assets here on Formosa, a couple of tacticals and a fighter, along with a light cruiser, a sub, and a destroyer. But they also do have some capital ships left behind in Japan, a battleship, a couple of destroyers there, a heavy and a light cruiser off of Nanking. So Japan, again, has pretty much shied away from focusing on China whatsoever and is going to be going after building up a couple of different fleets with heavy ground units supported by the transports so that they can go after, quite possibly, the Far East Command as soon as they go to war. So the Japanese built 4 more infantry. These destroyers here left in the Japanese home waters can take 1 infantry apiece on them. So I can see Japan taking all these units, moving down here into the Money Islands, positioning themselves where they might go after the Far East Command as soon as they go to war. So Japan doesn't want to make the mistake they made the last game, where they started off strong, took all the Money Islands, and had Anzac and the Far East Command bottled up, but didn't take either one of them out completely. And then when the U.S. got into the conflict, by the end of the game, Japan was holed up basically in Japan itself with very few naval units in the game and their empire rapidly shrinking. So Japan's going to follow the strategy this game of staying out of China, again, unless something happens where the CCP and the KMT just kind of beat themselves to death. They're going to stay out of China and go heavy on buying transports, ground units, to supplement the strong surface fleet they already have to start the game. And they are going to come down and not only take the money islands, but go after either the Far East Command, which is more likely, or possibly even Anzac, and completely take out one of them and then turn on the other one, maybe before the U.S. can even get in the conflict. So that's the Japanese thinking right now. The Far East Command, seeing as they can't build major or medium factories, they need to get more than one unit on the board at a time, especially with Japan building up all of their transport fleet. So they built a second minor factory, and that's down in Calcutta, so they can at least put 2 units on the board a turn here. So that's the policy that the Far East Command is pursuing. And then Anzac just simply upgraded another infantry or another militia to an infantry, saved most of their money. The U.S., again, nothing. These naval units here off of the west coast of the United States just sat where they were, didn't do a whole lot. Not much for them to do. And then as far as technology goes, the Germans are up to stage 2 for both improved factories and advanced mechs. And they can't advance past stage 2 until I believe it's July 38, maybe, the July 38 turn. The Italians, lucky for them, with just one roll each of the 2 turns, are already up to stage 2 for wartime economy, which is going to be big for them with how little income they produce each turn as it is. And then Japan got on the board with their first tech with improved construction. As far as the Allies go and the Comintern, the Russians are at stage 2 for both advanced mech and wartime economy, and the U.S. are at stage 2 for advanced submarine warfare and improved construction. French got on the board with wartime economy, and the British didn't succeed in moving improved construction up. So that's where things stand technology-wise. The income levels are pretty much the same. Germany went up another $1 for annexing Slovakia, and then that bumped both the British and French up 1, and that was it for income increases or decreases. So we'll see if the action picks up a little bit more heading here into turn number 3, July 37.